Okay, so welcome everyone, and thank you for taking the time to join us in today's panel. Today, you have all the pleasure of hearing from all of the authors of a recently published book entitled Four Futures, One Choice. So my name is Dr. Erica Parn, and I'm also one of the co-authors. And today's panel is going to be recorded and also published on my own podcast called Beyond BIM. So for those of you that may want to share it with their friends and colleagues, this will be available for you to do so. So let's begin. What is Four Futures, One Choice? Well, it's an ebook, although I do have with me today the printed copy as well. It's an ebook that's been written in layman's terms, so-called, by researchers and experts from the Center of Digital Built Britain in Cambridge. Now, this book particularly presents four future scenarios, and this is focusing on the construction and the built environment sector as a whole, envisioning 2040. And of course, this all depends upon the choices that we will be making today. It really is there to provide a sort of future glimpse or vignette into 2040 on understanding the potential four scenarios of what Britain could look like. And again, much of this is dependent upon some of the decisions that are being taken right now as we speak in these very unprecedented times. And now, without further ado, let's hear directly from the lead authors and co-authors themselves, who make up this interdisciplinary research team. So I'd like to get Didem, Kirsten, Richmond, Hara, Antiope, and Tyler all introduce themselves to the audience.
Hello, everyone. This is Didem. I'm a computer scientist who holds a PhD on mechatronics. I do data science for cyber-physical systems such as collaborative robots, autonomous vehicles, and smart cities and infrastructure.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kirsten Lam. I work for the Center for Digital Built Britain. My background is actually libraries, so I'm the only non-subject special expert among the co-authors.
Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Richmond Juvenaleshi. I work with the Cambridge Center for Housing and Planning Research. My research background is into land economy, smart cities, urban planning.
Hello, everyone. I'm Hara. I'm with the Center for Digital Built Britain. My background is in operation management, and my research focus is in complex service systems with a focus on safety.
Hello, everyone. I'm Antiope. I'm an architect engineer in the Center for Natural Material Innovation in the Department for Architecture. And my work focuses on the integration of advanced fabrication and construction methods with natural construction materials.
Hello, everyone. My name is Tyler. I'm from the Center for Digital Built Britain, and I'm a civil engineer by training, and my research looks at the delivery of construction projects enabled by digital technologies.
And finally, a quick introduction to myself. My own background is in architectural technology, but my current research is focusing on business model innovation and servitization in the built environment. So to start off with, I'd like to ask Richmond to perhaps give us a little bit of insight, and for those who might be outside of the professional world of architecture, engineering, and construction, what exactly is the built environment? So in other words, where does the concept start and end?
Yeah, thank you very much, Erica. That's a very good question. The built environment, as we have used in the book, relates to the surroundings that are created as a result of human activity. By this, we mean both physical and social infrastructure, like different transportation networks, housing, hospitals, markets, spaces for work, leisure, and also environmental amenities like parks. It also comprises services that are provided within these spaces, and also the integration of different systems like water, telecommunication, sanitation, sewage, to enhance livability. The built environment is not just limited to cities, as we often tend to think, but it also includes the countryside. And I should also emphasize that it is not a static concept, it's one that keeps evolving.
And if we take a more visionary or futuristic glimpse, then when you think about the built environment of 2040 and what looms on the horizon potentially, what might we anticipate to see and hear more of? And here I would welcome everybody to give their perspectives. So Didem, Kirsten, Richmond, Tyler, Antiope, and Hara, if you can just give us your thoughts on the future horizon of the built environment.
All right, I can start. What we see is that the data is extremely getting useful and important in built environment like any other disciplines. So we think that we will continue to see data-related issues as part of that, data ethics, privacy, security, artificial intelligence. We also think that there will be more autonomous vehicles, robots in our lives, from transportation to healthcare and so on.
Yeah, jumping off of what Didem was saying, I was really struck by the importance of the trust that people have or don't have in the organizations that manage their data, to how much they'll actually engage with the digital built environment. So for example, will I use public services that collect my data if I don't trust that what they'll be doing with that data? So we'll need to develop transparent, ethical, trustworthy implementations for technology that really make people's lives better. Otherwise, we'll lose that trust. And so we also need to consider who's represented and who is excluded by the digital systems that we create.
Yeah. I would also add that I think we are becoming more critical and more aware of the role that our built environment plays in our ability to live lives in different circumstances. So what COVID-19 has taught us is the fact that we need to rethink the different ways we design our built environment, think more about integrating green spaces, areas for recreation, because it has become clear that not everybody has access to these amenities, and we need to be able to democratize these things in preparation for future pandemics.
Yeah, adding to this point, as Didem just mentioned, digital technologies and data are already changing and will completely reshape the way that we deliver projects and the way that we operate the built assets. So I think data will be the key to decarbonizing the built environment, for example, and technologies like digital twins will deliver the data that we needed actually to uncover savings in terms of energy, carbon capture, and operational.
So building on Tyler's point, I completely agree that there will be a great advancement in digital technologies, and I believe that the discussion will be framed around how we can direct these advances towards tackling the climate crisis and delivering all the urban infrastructure that we need. So I believe we should anticipate an integration of new construction methods and more natural construction materials for the development of a smart and sustainable built environment.
From my side, I believe that the consequences of the past 12 months and from the pandemic, the extended lockdowns that we have been going through will have a drastic impact on the way we see cities in the future. A lot more people will choose to work from home and more companies will endorse that. That will mean less commute and more time with family and friends. And at the same time, this situation will free up a lot of space in cities that was used for offices and make more available space for parks, greenery, and affordable and sustainable housing.
I think I would only add to that is the economy. The economy is, of course, is inextricably linked, and particularly with the growth of intangible assets such as digital services. So many businesses are, of course, feeling the pinch and the increased competitive nature of our sector. And they're also having to rethink about transformation of their own business model operations and contracts, and many of which have been for the past few decades moving or transitioning from products to services. This is sometimes referred to as servitization. And of course, our construction industry is is considered a cyclical industry, meaning it's very sensitive to the economic booms and bust cycles, which we are, of course, anticipating a lot of changes given the situation that we find ourselves in. And simultaneously, the linear economic model for the built environment is also under threat, and it's increasingly becoming unsustainable. But to get a better understanding of the future scenarios, it really is important for us to understand the method by which we, all of the researchers sitting around this table, have come to the assumptions that we've made. So Didem, you first introduced scenario planning as a method to us and our research team. For the novice, can you describe this very method used in research, future planning and scenario planning? What is it exactly, and what is its importance?
Thank you, Erika. Before explaining what scenario planning is, I want to say that I am extremely happy that I managed to introduce this to you, because I think it is a wonderful tool. And now I know that you share the same excitement as I do. So we use scenario planning methodology. It was the main methodology in this project. And it is simply a strategic tool that helps to build long-term strategies. What we do is to bring diverse range of stakeholders together to discuss one specific topic. In our case, this was the future of built environment. Interdisciplinary background of the group makes the discussions very interesting, because as you would also know, we all see the world from different perspectives, and we do have different priorities about what trends, what factors, what uncertainties to look in more deep. So when we gather different people from different backgrounds, we make these specific points to disappear, and we make something which belongs to us. It is a playful, engaging, interdisciplinary way of working, and it is an extremely creative process. So I suggest everyone to look deeply and details of this methodology and try to integrate it to their daily lives and business.
Now, some of our more astute listeners or readers of our published paper and book may question the accuracy or scientific validity of scenario planning method. Perhaps, Tyler, how would you respond to these limitations and criticisms of the method?
Thanks, Erica. I'd say that actually scenario planning is an established future study method, and it has a range of previous applications. And as Didem just explained, in this study, we followed a methodological approach, which is suggested in the academic literature. So, and that involved a range of steps in the workshop. So we first identified strategic concerns within the built environment, taking into account different perspectives. Then we identified some factors and environmental forces related to that. Then that was followed by a definition of the scenario logics that we would follow. And then we elaborated the scenarios and analyzed some implications and possible strategies. So it was a very rigorous process following an established methodological approach.
Now, the research itself, of course, focuses on two very specific outcomes. One is achieving of sustainable development goals, and the second is the dependency ratio. Hara and Antiope, can you describe these two outcomes in particular, and why were they selected for scenario planning?
Thank you, Erica. That's a very interesting question. I can start and explain why we chose the dependency ratio. So thinking about the situation today, in the UK, people are now living more than ever before. As a result, we have the older people are making up a growing proportion of the population. This means that we have less available workers and at the same time, higher demand for public services. This can influence, for instance, the type of homes that we're going to need, the type of communities, even the technological requirements in the future. And to deal with these challenges, we need to make some decisions today. For example, Brexit and all the travel restrictions that took place over the past few months due to the pandemic can have a further impact on the dependency ratio. So we need to make decisions now about the right immigration policies in order to allow for more young and qualified people to come in the UK and join the workforce. So while we discussed a number of different factors during the workshop, we felt that the dependency ratio specifically can have an effect across many other dimensions of the cities in 2040 and should therefore be one of the main factors that we used to form our scenarios.
As far as the Sustainable Development Goals are concerned, which is the second main factor that we considered in our studies, the Sustainable Development Goals, they were adopted by all the members of the United Nations in 2015. And it's a call for action to address poverty, climate crisis, and ensure prosperity and peace for everyone. And it's a well-established and widely accepted framework. And the reason for that is because these goals recognize the fact that all the different factors are interconnected, and they provide specific metrics that we need to achieve in order to secure change. So the UK is obviously part of the UN, it's a member, and it has put in place legally binding commitments to achieve these targets. But of course, the fact that they're quite challenging, and the fact that we went through an unprecedented crisis over the past year with the pandemic, they pose a risk as to whether and to what extent we will be able to achieve them. So the fact that all these goals are so interconnected and they can affect different aspects of the built environment in our societies, they placed them in the center of all the discussions we had. And this is the main reason we selected them as one of the main factors.
And of course, as part of this book, the core of the book really is the 4 different scenarios. One is a legacy of hope, second one being generation 0, then we have too little, too late, and finally the gloomiest one, resigned to our fate. So we have 4 very interesting, very different perspectives and future scenarios. What are the outcomes of each one of these 4 scenarios? Perhaps we can start with a legacy of hope. Richmond, what does that mean?
Thank you very much, Erica. As the name rightly suggests, a legacy of hope suggests that there is hope, there's light at the end of the tunnel. We are not yet there, but we've made strides and we've made considerable progress towards sustaining. So I would like to talk about this scenario by also paying attention to the 7 dimensions that we set ourselves. I'm sure my colleagues may have captured it. So we were thinking about 7 different dimensions: people, mobility, infrastructure, government, economy, technology, resources. And all of these different dimensions are impacted by how the transformation in the built environment is going to unfold. So I would like to walk readers through each of them. So when we talk about people, the people dimension, we envisage a world where the birth rate has slowed. People are now living longer. Life expectancy has obviously gone up. However, because of climate refugee, more and more people are coming to the United Kingdom and also in Europe. But then we are also seeing that resettlement and asylum processes have become better managed. One thing that is also very interesting is because of the impressive community spirit that was demonstrated during the COVID pandemic, we have now become a community or society that is more empathetic, and therefore there's a very strong sense of community across Britain. If you look at the mobility dimension, this is now a world where we have reduced our share of private car ownership as more and more people have joined ride sharing and ride hailing schemes. A good number of the population are also now using electric vehicles. And what that means is that we are reducing our carbon footprint significantly. equally important is the fact that we are also now putting a lot of pressure on our electricity grid, which is now forcing government to make substantial commitments in terms of finding renewable sources of energy. If you look at infrastructure, something interesting happened in this particular scenario, in the sense that both central government and local government have now increased their expenditure on creating more public spaces because it was very critical in terms of the COVID situation. And now areas that have experienced dereliction are now witnessing a lot of revitalization and investment. But equally important is the fact that because we have changed our consumption habits, we are seeing a lot of the existing infrastructure being converted to different uses because of digital technologies and the fact that more people are working from home, and also we have reduced our private car ownership. So for example, multi-story car parks have now been turned into hydroponic farms, and urban roads have now been converted into more bicycle lanes and also pedestrian walk. If you look at the domain or the dimension of technology, we are also seeing an increased digital connectivity across Britain and also reducing our digital illiteracy among the population. Equally important is the fact that technology now plays a crucial role in the workplaces as we rely more on robots together with human beings to deliver services to our population. But we now also have a very vibrant data governance framework that is trusted, secured, and also oriented towards the public good through the deployment of IoTs, sensors, actuators in the built environment. What this has done essentially is to help us build an ecosystem of digital twins of our critical national infrastructure, which is able to now help us to quickly take action ahead of events like flooding, fire outbreaks, massive congestion on our highways and rail network, for example. In terms of government, we are also seeing that government has also increased its expenditure on adult social care, housing, and pension for older generation people who have become more susceptible to intermittent extreme weather conditions. Following Scotland example, the UK government has also mandated that all schools and large infrastructure projects should be completed using timber as the main construction material. And strikingly, there's now the New Generation Act, which ensures that all government projects must demonstrate that they have really thought about the interests of the future generation and have secured it. So which is quite very interesting. Regarding the economy, following COVID-19, more employers have now instituted a very flexible working arrangement for their staff members, especially those with responsibility for children and older people in their household. So as a result, adult social care has now become a prestigious job and it is well paid. In terms of resources, we are also seeing a joined up effort between government, international development agencies, civil societies, and activists in 2020 to reduce greenhouse gas across the UK. And this has led to a widespread tree planting exercise across the United Kingdom. As a result of this, we are clear in line with our 2050 agenda of net zero carbon targets. And also recycling has become our second nature. And there's now a thriving circular economy that is backed by both government, businesses, and activists. So we call this the legacy of hope because we clearly can see the pathway to a more prosperous society, but we are still not there. There are challenges to overcome.
And then Didem, what about Generation Zero? What does that future look like?
Thank you, Erika. A Generation Zero scenario describes the world where Sustainable Development Goals are succeeded in 2030, and we have low dependency ratio. So in this world, we have larger workforce who is working in jobs that they care. This is another positive scenario when compared with other two. The world is configured to promote human environmental well-being. We have managed to decrease the carbon footprint, introduce smart devices to support us while protecting our data privacy, security, and we are thriving in green information economy where we are inclusive, we are equal, and we are caring with the environment and to each other.
So quite idyllic and utopian, the two views, Richmond and Didem. Now moving on to Too Little Too Late, Antiope, what might that future scenario look like?
As you said, it's not as optimistic as the previous ones that we have heard. So the too little, too late scenario describes a future in which we haven't been able to reach the Sustainable Development Goals, and we have a young population, so a low dependency ratio. However, the workforce comprises people that entered the work environment during an economic depression. So even though the climate crisis and addressing it is in the agenda, it has a lower priority than the goal of rebooting the economy. Despite the fact, of course, that since we haven't been able to reach the targets, we have more frequent natural disaster phenomena such as fires and storms, etc. However, as I mentioned before, it's mostly the economy that acts as a driver for the development of digital technologies. So we see a wider application of the technologies. However, and there is a gradual reduction of the carbon footprint. We can see that there are some active green mobility appearing, but the infrastructure hasn't been developed enough to allow for a wide application of these. So any changes are gradual, they're slow, and there's a lack of a clear strategy and an interoperability between digital infrastructure in different sectors. So we cannot really benefit as a society and the built environment from these technologies that are being used.
And Hara, what about resigned to our fate? What might that look like?
Thank you, Erika. Well, as you can tell from the name, probably, this scenario doesn't really describe an ideal world or something we can really look forward to. It describes a world where the Sustainable Development Goals have not been achieved. The dependency ratio is high. It's potentially still growing. The world is becoming more and more familiar with extreme events such as flooding and wildfires. The divide between people who can afford to move to more privileged areas and those who have stayed behind in polluted cities is also growing. And even though there is a wider adoption of digitization, automation, robotization, and this is mainly to deal with the shrinking workforce due to the higher dependency ratio and the increased need for carers, due to the extended austerity that happened after the pandemic, there was a different focus, and there is still lack of proper data regulation and clear strategy to focus on the data for the public good. So the trust in technology is still very low.
Okay, so we can see that we have two polar opposites. We have four scenarios. Now, if we want to transition towards the more idyllic scenarios, then what are the next steps, really? So Tyler and Kirsten, what will the future strategies potentially look like if we want to transition into a more positive change?
Thanks, Erika. We actually identified three main strategies that will make our vision of the future reality. And there are many aspects related to these strategies, but in summary, the first one is that we need thoughtful investment in digital technologies, and meaning that technologies such as artificial intelligence, digital twins, IoT, Internet of Things, they have great potential to transform the built environment for better, but their applications should be thoughtful and responsible, and they should be managed and carefully through proper governance systems and guiding principles. Another aspect is sharing data security across the built environment. That's going to be key to leverage the potential of these digital technologies, such as, for example, digital twins, and then enable a positive vision of the future as we hope. The second strategy is related to giving priority to decarbonization and biodiversity in the built environment. Sorry, I'm still. So I was saying that the second strategy is about giving priority and to decarbonization and biodiversity in the built environment. And in that sense, the use of modern methods of construction, for example, and novel construction materials offer an opportunity to create a built environment that is carbon free and that will allow to reduce carbon emissions during construction and also across the entire life cycle of the assets. And then Kirsten can comment on the third strategy.
Yeah, the third strategy we talked about, which is sort of woven through everything that Tyler just said, is governance. We considered the important role that governance has to play in, enabling the flourishing of both human societies and the natural environment together as a kind of a codependent system. And these governance strategies included things like providing a social safety net that really protects everyone against potential future shocks and creates kind of a society-wide resilience. To supporting the development of a green information economy, which uses digital data to help us reduce our collective carbon footprint. And finally, we considered, creating green jobs all over the country, in the areas that have been hard hit by economic problems before, so that there are opportunities for people to get involved in designing and building and operating a digitally enabled and really sustainable built environment. So we considered all of these as, none of them are really independent. They're all kind of pushing in the same direction towards these more beneficial outcomes. And these were just our suggestions. We didn't really look into when exactly you'd have to do any of them, but we looked at all of them as playing a role in sort of moving us in the right direction.
And Kirsten, it seems to me that the scenarios could also be used to sensitize and motivate anyone, virtually from school children, leaders, all the way to CEOs. So was this one of the initial motivations in creating the book, or did this happen as something that naturally evolved into us thinking about sharing and disseminating across a whole different range of age groups?
Great question, thanks. Yeah, we started out by writing an academic article, and that's where most of us feel the most comfortable, but we realized that there were messages in amongst the work that we were doing that were relevant and valuable to basically anyone across the country. And so yes, it really was the initial motivation to write this particular book in language that's easy to understand and make it available for free, especially. We wanted everyone to be able to engage with these ideas and pick which future they are interested in, pick which strategies they're most enthusiastic about, and kind of actually empower them to get behind it. So we're also hoping to, you mentioned school children. We're hoping to engage younger generations with this by rewriting it as an interactive children's book. And that's focusing on skills and adaptations for the future. And that's launching on the 27th of March for the Cambridge Festival. And we're also speaking about the book as many places as we can. So, big thanks to Cambridge Zero for letting us talk about this work in the context of your other excellent projects to, reduce carbon emissions and also, just support the natural environment. So, just to plug the details of all these upcoming events and outputs and things like that, as well as both books, you'll find details about all of that on the CDBB website, which is cdbb.cam.ac.uk/4futures, and that's all spelled out.
So we have a little bit of extra time, but in the meantime, I will remind the audience that now is the time to post questions that you may want to ask the authors. And we'll follow up with a quick question. This is to Richmond. Now, it's a continuation. As the first SDGs are about eliminating poverty in the world, how do you think these digital futures can contribute to ending poverty in the UK?
I think that's a very good question. I think we need to be a bit cautious about the extent to which we repose confidence in technology reducing poverty. But then it's also important to sort of open the discussion about what it means to be poor. I think that there's a tendency to reduce poverty to lack of cash or maybe assets, physical assets of value like properties or other things. And if you view it in that light, you might think that, well, there's very little technology can do. But if you are able to sort of give people the education and training in digital literacy, we have all of a sudden seen a lot of people become Facebookers, YouTubers, social media content creators, people, and that barrier between the rich and the poor is being broken just through digital technology. So on one hand, there is a prospect, but we should also not lose sight of the fact that in our quest to sort of rely almost entirely everything on technology, we might also find out that we are probably exacerbating the digital divide, and people who are not able, especially if we don't put in place policies that will help people bridge the digital divide, then we'll create a society that is further segmented between those who know how to use technology and create value out of it and those who don't.
Thank you, Richmond. We have now received a couple of questions from our audience. I think I will start with Stephanie's question. So this one is on a very interesting topic, and that is on digital twins. Stephanie asks, how can digital twins assist housing providers now to plan for fairer, more efficient housing now and for the coming decades? I'll let any one of the, so Didem, why don't you respond to that?
First of all, great question, Stephanie. I a bit work with digital twins before in manufacturing and automotive industry, currently in infrastructure. I just wanted to answer this question because CDBB published, I think it was 2 years ago, a document which is called Gemini Principles for Building Digital Twins. And they are the framework, or these principles tells us different things, starting by asking questions about why are we building these digital twins? What is the purpose of this? And how are we guaranteeing that it will be functioning effectively? And then there is also different parts where we talk about the privacy, the security, the trust part of the digital twins. So I think your question is a great question for different reasons. One is we sometimes try to or tend to focus on the technological side of things. So digital twins are great technologies. We saw their benefits in different disciplines, in different domains. Now it is on the agenda of construction and infrastructure industries. But when we only concentrate on the technology part and we just want to implement things, then we forget to see this bigger picture. Why am I building the digital twin? And you say that how can build the digital twins to be fairer and more efficient housing? And that is the purpose of that digital twin that they need to focus on. And then the data that digital twin needs to collect, analyze, and produce insights is now about more sustainability related measures, right? So I would suggest you to check the Gemini principles. I think they are great way to help someone to understand what needs to be considered to build any digital twin, but especially when you talk about a fair, inclusive, equal, sustainable, they are great resources. Thank you.
Can I add a sentence? Yeah,
Go ahead.
Yeah, I want to touch on the more efficient housing now. I believe we are all familiar with the Dame Judith Hackett's review about the tower that caught fire in London. And one of the things that came out quite clearly was the construction materials. And one of the things digital twins can help us in this respect is the level of standardization. So we have a BIM model of all the materials that are used in building this. So if anything should go wrong, it's easy to be able to identify whether a product or a material that was used in constructing this building meets specification. Because emerging evidence suggests that part of the materials that were used didn't actually meet the specification and things like that. So these are areas where I think that a digital twin, which is essentially a digital representation of this physical asset by means of the data we have about it, can help us to be able to build more efficiently and know that whatever we are building actually meets specification, and that brings in the trust that my colleague just mentioned.
Thank you. Now I have just one technical question at the start. This one is coming from Ben, and it's specifically on the topic of BIM. So one of the questions is about whether or not BIM will include building energy efficiency information, such as building heat loss information for decarbonization of the built environment. This is a question perhaps for somebody with a more technical enabled mind.
I think I can comment on that. I've been doing research looking at the practical implementation of BIM. So I would say that technologies like digital twins will provide the data that we need to account for carbon emissions across the whole life cycle of assets in the future. But digital twins have in their foundation building information models. So BIM provides the foundation to build a digital twin. And for that consideration, I think it needs to have a kind of change mindset since the beginning of the life of the asset. So since early stages of the project. And a very important aspect related to that is the requirement from a climate perspective. So to account for carbon emissions across the whole life cycle of the asset, especially during the operational phase, where we can like make decisions about emissions when they are actually happening, we need to have data for that. And to have data for that, we need to make decisions earlier in this in the beginning of the project to collect data, to build information models with this data. So I think for that's possible from a technological perspective, but we need a kind of change mindset of contractors and people involved in the whole life cycle of the asset as well. But that's for sure, it's something that's going to be possible in a very near future. It's already many big clients across the country are already collecting data on a range of aspects, including energy consumption during the operational phase. And BIM technologies have been used already to design assets that are more efficient. So we use a range of BIM tools in the design stage already to identify and compare different options in terms of energy consumption.
Thanks, Tyler. In addition to that, Ben has also asked that they are currently working on satellite thermal infrared data provisions for built environment and Cambridge. So he's asking whether it might be helpful to integrate together with CDBB on this very topic.
I'm happy to take that question. Yeah, as Tyler was talking about, more data is helpful to a certain extent, but as we've sort of been saying, it sort of depends on the question you want to answer by joining up that data. So anyone who has listened to this and thinks that they're working on something that's relevant, that's interesting, that wants to sort of hook in with us and collaborate, we're more than happy to. I just recommend going to the CDBB website, which we'll drop in the chat, or emailing inquiries@cdbb.cam.ac.uk. And we can work out the details of individual research projects. But we are working on sort of big, Cambridge scale digital twin projects where, we're looking at sensors to answer various different types of questions. Basically, bring us some interesting questions and we'll be happy to collaborate.
And just a final question. What difference would it have made to the scenarios if the participants had been from a different industry or policy background?
Sure, I'll take this one as well. Yeah, so first off, many of us are from different industry backgrounds, having worked in different sectors before coming to Cambridge. But of course, the interests of the participants in a scenario planning method really do shape the sorts of scenarios and factors that get explored. We believe that with our diverse group, we came up with a pretty robust and wide-ranging and interesting set of scenarios. And it's hard to know exactly how they would be different with different participants involved. What we think would be especially interesting to us would be to know, how to use these exact same scenarios with groups of industry and policy stakeholders, and especially the general public, to, introduce ideas to the scenarios that we hadn't previously considered, and then also to use some of the ideas coming from the scenarios to actually plan a kind of, society-wide, system-wide resilience to all of the different possible futures that could happen, because none of these scenarios is guaranteed to happen, but there are a range of possibilities that we need to, as a society, as built environment professionals, as anyone, really need to prepare ourselves for, resiliently and across the spectrum.
Yeah, I think we've all come to realize that even as we were writing the paper and book, we sort of found ourselves in a situation that we clearly understood the importance of scenario planning. Now, thinking again into the hopeful side, Lisa asks, what does the panel think is the biggest challenge to securing one of the better future scenarios? Perhaps, Antiope, you might want to help us out here. What could be the potential huge challenge that we need to focus and overcome?
Thank you, Erica. That's a very interesting question. And I think to answer it, I will build on what Tyler said before. So we're at the stage where we do have the digital technologies that help us get a better understanding of how our built environment works and what emissions are linked to it, both embodied and operational. We do have materials that can help us tackle these issues, but I think that the main challenge lies into the policy and the governance that would make these changes necessary. So rather than relying on individual clients and people choosing a more viable and sustainable option, I think it's local governments and policies that can make that change. So for example, we know that the new London plan requires every new planning application to consider whole life cycle emissions, which is something that should be mandatory for every new application. We know that local communities such as in Hackney in London, they have a timber first policy, so they require more sustainable natural material to be considered first for every new building. So there are these small initiatives that can actually drive changes, and I think it's important to inform people about such initiatives and try and get similar changes at a larger scale.
If I may add to that, I think it's a very interesting question and also a very difficult one to sort of think around which of the best scenarios, what are the challenges. I think a number of things can be mentioned. My greatest fear is falling back into the default mode. That is, we are out of the pandemic and life goes on in general, because if you look at some of the things we have outlined, particularly with the legacy of hope, a lot of people giving up on their private car ownership. These are not things that people are easily to let go. And but then we've also realized that our quest for consumption can be curtailed, can be controlled. As in, how many of us have not bought new clothing for the past 3 or 4 months? It just tells you that there's an aspect of our society or our life that is much more important than the other. And we can still deliver efficiency to some degree, whilst also making time to take care of older people or children. So my greatest challenge is we easily reverting back to the default mode of let's keep our normal practices going as if nothing happened. And that is the greatest challenge that I fear. But everything points to the fact that we need this radical transformation in terms of how we organize the built environment, how we conduct activities, work, social relations, mobility, and all that. So for me, that is one thing I keep emphasizing, that we need to really rethink. This pandemic has offered us that platform, that opportunity. It has given us glimpses, not a full picture, but we can still see clearly that it is possible for some people to work from home and still also be able to provide that care, that family relations and things that we don't have the privilege of enjoying so much because of how the default system of built environment is organized.
Yeah, if I may sort of piggyback off of that, that really points to the need to change what we value, and that's, you know, that's both incredibly difficult, but actually probably easier than we fear. I think we discussed in the sort of concluding parts of the book when we were talking about you know, next steps. We talked about procuring for different types of value, and that's work that's been going on for quite a while, you know, sort of changing from primarily, you know, getting value out of infrastructure projects in the financial terms to, you know, how does this infrastructure that we're building actually help make people's lives better? You know, what trade-offs are we making with the natural environment that, you know, we're no longer willing to make? And, you know, it's down to the clients procuring those projects to sort of set those values. It's down to, you know, the contractors who are working on it to say we will only work on projects with people who fulfill these values. You know, there's sort of a push and pull, and there's a lot of different levers. And it's down to, you know, people, citizens sort of saying, you know, we think, you know, the way the status quo that I think we all kind of fear going back to, that's not acceptable anymore. So, you know, we were really hoping with this book to kind of really empower people with the language around what policies might actually help, what things should you know about that, you know, what decisions are being made right now that are going to lock us into particular futures. And if we can sort of shine a light on what those decisions are and you know, the underlying values that, you know, those decisions kind of point to, the more we can kind of actually hopefully steer things in the right direction.
Go ahead, Hara.
Okay, thank you. So if I can kind of just highlight points that were already mentioned, I think one of the biggest challenges is making very clear that everyone needs to engage with this now. It's not just about, you know, the policymakers or the industry or the researchers. It's about everyone understanding how they should do something now. And this is one of the reasons why we decided to also add the children's book, because I think it's very important that we engage the new generation in this. They will need to have the required skills for the future where we are all looking for, and not ending up with the less desirable ones. So I think one of the biggest challenges is making everyone understand how important it is to get engaged and, you know, do something to get where we want to.
And
Just
Didem,
a last point. Building on Hara's comment, I would say that's really, really important. Make sure that everyone understands the importance of this change, because from a more industry perspective, change in the construction sector has been really, really slow for decades because we've been doing things the same way. And although we have new technologies and government is mandating new things, for example, in the case of BIM, the change is still a bit slow. So it's a huge cultural change from multiple perspectives. And I think that's really is essential, it's fundamental to make sure that we are going to achieve the optimistic scenarios in the future. So the pace of the change needs to be accelerated.
yeah, I would agree with you there, Tyler, especially at the decision making is also happening at a business level. And like you rightly pointed out, of course, our industry is going through massive changes at the moment. It's increasing the pressure on a lot of the business key decision makers. But the discussion has to go beyond profits and losses, and it really needs to take into account society. And as so many of the researchers around here also have the foundation understanding that this is a socio-technical system that we're talking about, the built environment, it inevitably touches upon society. And whatever that value proposition is, it is inextricably linked with people and society. And business decision makers need to bear that in mind. So finally, as we're now reaching towards the end, I would like to just give a huge thanks first and foremost to Cambridge Zero, and a thank you to all of the authors for sitting down and giving an overview of the book and your thoughts on particularly the directions for the built environment in the future. Now, I have posted into the chat, of course, the link for the Cambridge Zero Symposium taking place tomorrow. So this is available for people who are interested in talks similar to this nature. And of course, we will be posting any unanswered questions via social media on Twitter. So in case we've missed any questions, we will be making sure that that's answered at least online from our side. So without further ado, a huge thanks from my end as well. And that's all from us.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Erica.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.